Hey guys, Preston here, and welcome back to another video. I know it's been a while, but some interesting sports news has come up in the past few days, and it's got me, motivated to make videos again. So expect more content to ramp up, starting these upcoming weeks. I'll be back in college, and I'll have more time on my hands, not working, so I'm gonna try to upload more again, which we'll see. But if you actually see the videos, then you know that's true. But anyways. Sports business kind of stuff today. It's not what I've always talked about in the past, but it is something that kind of interests me always. So you might see a few more videos like this as different deals are announced and stuff like that. But anyways, today we are talking about the UFC signing a 7-year, $7.7 billion deal with Paramount / CBS. Kind of just an overview what this means for the sport, what this means for Paramount, kind of stuff like that. Just general stuff, how it affects you as a fan, first and foremost, is probably the most important for you guys to think about. So, sorry, I'm rambling a bit. It's very late as I record this, but so this is coming off the back of UFC's deal with ESPN ending. I know for the most part, I believe most people thought this would be a split deal, where likely Netflix would take the pay-per-view level events, your numbered events as they'd call them in official releases that have come out recently, but those would go to Netflix, and then all your fight nights would stay with ESPN still. But kind of the last few weeks, there was talks, there was ideas that maybe that wouldn't end up being the case. I think when Larry Ellison, I believe is the name, the new head of CBS after the merger with Skydance, was seen meeting with Trump and Dana White, like they would sit in cage-side with them at a fight. You could have inferred some things about that, like maybe there was some stuff going on there. And so yes, the CBS Paramount made a splash. This new merger really got them motivated to jump into the rights game. I think this makes sense for that reason as well. Like, it's a high number. You see 1.1 billion. You might be a little surprised by that number, but I think for a few reasons it's not too shocking. I mean, one, we knew they were going to make more anyways. The UFC, they made $550 million a year, their previous deal with ESPN, and that was with pay-per-views. So you can kind of view it as like to get the UFC away from their pay-per-view business, which I believe I did the math. It was like if each pay-per-view, all 13, sold 300,000 buys at like the $80 or something, it would have been close to 300 million in revenue for the UFC. And so doubling their deal with ESPN means they make more than the lost pay-per-view revenue, if that makes sense. So this deal more than covers what they were making, or, in the rough estimate of what they're making. I'm sure some pay-per-views sold more than 300K, some probably did worse. And as we saw this year and last year, like this year's pay-per-view buy numbers were worse than last year's, and it's a trend that probably would have continued if we're being honest. At $80 a pop, in this economy, there's not a lot of people doing that, and obviously piracy is growing more and more popular. And when the UFC is already a younger demographic, that means they have less spendable income, and they also are more versed in technology and in the world of piracy. So there's a lot of piracy going on, which also I think that's why it makes perfect sense for the UFC to abandon the pay-per-view model. Sorry, I got something in my eye. But so I guess we'll just break this down on what this means for both. We'll start with the UFC because I assume that's what most people care about. For the UFC, this is huge, I think. Like, first of all, just it further legitimizes the sport by them earning $1.1 billion per year on their TV deal with just one network. That's, to be honest, that's pretty equivalent to even some of the big leagues. Obviously, they split their deals, so it's not as fair, but they also have a lot more games, like content to sell to these people. The UFC sold like 43 events, I believe. NBA, there's 30 teams, they all play 82 games. That's a lot more event space you can sell. But regardless, you would look at like an ESPN's deal with the NFL is like 1 billion. Same thing with NBA's deal with like an Amazon or an NBC, and it's the same. They make more. The UFC makes more per year on their TV deal than the NHL does with their two partners now, which further solidifies. Dana talked about it a long time ago, being one of the four major sports. If you're going off purely TV revenue, they make more a year than the NHL currently does combined with their deals. So no shade to the NHL. I love the NHL, but it's just the reality is this further legitimizes the sport. It also should increase the audience of the sport. You've reached a point where now, instead of pay-per-views, you have a steady income stream, a big one at that, at 1.1 billion, and you're also trading in your pay-per-views, which, like I said, I'm still pretty sure they're going to end up making more money this way than they would have been keeping pay-per-views with a similar TV deal, unless they're going to get way more and keep pay-per-views, which probably isn't super realistic, I would have guessed. But anyways, they'll probably make more money anyways, but they're also going to get far more eyeballs because the barrier to entry for fans has dropped dramatically. If you bought every UFC pay-per-view, not to mention the fact you have to already have ESPN Plus to even be able to buy the pay-per-views, which is another like $12 a month and likely rising, you would have spent well over $1,000 a year just being a fan of the UFC and following it fully. And I think they've noticed that too with their pay-per-view buys, as more and more people were picking and choosing which ones they'd buy, if they bought any at all. Now, for like $120, maybe a little less depending on the deal you get for Paramount, you can get every UFC event, all of them, all the 13 numbered ones and all the fight nights. Not to mention, like, it's likely that Paramount will raise their subscription prices next year, or but that's not new. Every streamer does that. The frog in water kind of deal where they slowly raise their prices. But if it comes along with tentpole investments like the UFC, like they're rumored to invest in Zuffa Boxing as well, they can better justify raising their price. And to be honest, even if it was $20 a month, which I don't think they'll do that, at least not right away, that'd be a pretty big jump. It'd probably be like a $2 or $3 jump more realistically. But either way, it would still be way cheaper for UFC fans than what it is today in 2025. So I think it's a massive win for the fans, first and foremost. I think the UFC actually does benefit in the long run through increased eyeballs, like just the fact that there's going to be sounds like there's going to be at least 4 events on actual CBS, the channel, each year. There's kind of been up in the air. One time they said almost all of them, then Dana said like 4, and now it's like who knows. But even if it's 4, that's still massive exposure on one of the big 4 networks where you don't need any sort of subscription. You just need a $10 antenna you can get from Walmart. Like, those will likely set MMA viewership records. I mean, just for reference, I think there was a Kimbo Slice to Elite XC way back in like 2010, 2011 on CBS that pulled 6 million viewers. So there's a good chance that any tentpole event they put on actual CBS will pull multi-millions of viewers, which is not very common for MMA or combat sports in this day and age. It puts MMA back in the mainstream and in the normal channels. Pay-per-view has always kind of made it feel like a separate sport. It's not. None of the other sports run off this model anymore. Even boxing has gone away from it. So it was time. The TKO board members, or the chair people, were talking about that too when they did an interview with CNBC. It was just time to move on from the model. Obviously, they still have 5 more pay-per-views to sell, but starting in 2026, it's the smart thing to do for everyone, I think. And I know some people were worried about, they said, leaving ESPN, you're not going to be on SportsCenter anymore. You have to worry about being covered less on ESPN's massive social media space. They have multi-millions of followers, tens of millions of followers on pretty much every platform. But I think there's a few things to where it doesn't hurt as much as maybe it used to, or for other leagues. First of all, the UFC's main demographic is pretty young anyways. It's one of the younger sports in terms of watchers, so I really don't think they were pulling as many people as they think, just casually like, oh, I had SportsCenter on and they told me about the UFC, so I watched it. Not to mention viewership on ESPN's this regular daytime programming is not what it used to be. And then even with the social media apps, I feel like most young people who are sports fans don't just follow ESPN, or even if they do, they're still aware of the UFC. And the UFC also runs its own social media incredibly well. And especially compared to some of these other sports, or your big 4, some of the older ones, their social media presence is larger. They've been doing it for a long time. They can promote their own stuff pretty efficiently, even without ESPN's backing. Not to mention CBS, they're not the best at it, but they've proven with like the Golasso network and their TikTok with that account and stuff that they can do pretty decent on social media. I'm sure they'll likely launch a MMA page, and we'll see where that kind of goes. But I don't think the UFC is really worried about that. I think the money is enough to make them less worried about that. Plus, they have a loyal traveling fan base. Like, they proved it when they went from Spike to Fox Sports, and a lot of fans came with them then. The UFC basically launched and kept ESPN Plus afloat when it first started. That was like their tentpole thing, was ESPN Plus. So, I mean, was the UFC on ESPN Plus. So I think they'll be fine anyways. And I think the benefits of being no longer behind a paywall and even getting events on big CBS outweighs maybe the losses of not being on SportsCenter as much or not on ESPN social media as much. Which also, I think ESPN will probably still post them. I don't know how much. But the fact that they have a deal with the WWE, which if you don't know, the WWE shares the same parent company as the UFC, so I'm not sure ESPN might play a little nicer and not be less, petty about it, because they'd be hurting a company they still work with through the WWE. Not to mention that Bleacher Report and other pages still cover MMA. Like, MMA is huge for like the knockouts and stuff. They do numbers on social media posts. So I really don't think ESPN's going to exclude itself from that stuff if they can. And so I'm not as worried about that as some other people might be. And I think the overall exposure is just better. Not to mention, just even raw numbers, ESPN Plus has like 25 million subscribers. Paramount Plus has 77 million. So there's just a bigger pool. Anyways, there's still, 77 million people could randomly stumble across it when they open the Paramount Plus app. So yeah, I think overall I'm more bullish on this deal than even some other people are. There's been some worries about fighter pay, stuff like that. It's like there's not pay-per-view points anymore. But I think Luke Thomas rightfully pointed out that with the numbers they were doing on pay-per-view anymore, they were hardly getting past like the first tier of that pay-per-view buy sharing stuff. And I don't know if it quells any of these people's fears or not, but Dana today, after Dana White's Contender Series, his press conference, he mentioned that pay will be going up. Obviously, since all this stuff's still being negotiated, he didn't give actual numbers. But the one thing he did seem pretty set on confirming with everyone was that bonuses were indeed going to go up, your performance bonuses, stuff like that. So we'll see. You would hope so. Obviously the UFC doesn't have the best reputation with taking care of its fighters, but if you double your TV deal and you take away the pay-per-view points, I would hope they're going to do a little better with that. But it's been the case with MMA for years, and these fighters never... they don't try to unionize or anything like that. So at some point, there's really not much you can say. At some point, it's up to the fighters to take it in their own hands if they see a problem with it. And so I really don't think it's on fans to, boycott or do anything crazy, because ultimately it's up to them. They got to make a stand on that stuff if they feel it's necessary. And apparently a lot of them don't. I won't speak for them, and I do wish everyone, in a perfect world, everyone get paid more and everything. But it's. We'll see. You're worth what you bargain for is a classic saying, and the fighters don't seem to bargain for themselves enough. We'll see, though. But like I said, first and foremost, the deal is more about the fans, and this is huge for fight fans. Just the fact that the money you are saving, not having to buy pay-per-views. I'll be honest, I've fallen off the UFC a bit. I'm one of the people they get back with this deal. I used to host fight nights pretty often. I'd host like 3 or 4 cards a year with all my buddies, I'd say, which obviously that's not the same as someone who's buying 13 of them, but I would still pay for full price, not illegally streamed, 3 or 4 a year, bring everyone over. But that was when they were still like $60, $65. Once they got to 80, I stopped buying them. I'll just be honest. Price was part of it, but also, if we're being honest, they've spread themselves thinner and thinner, and unfortunately that's not something that got solved. The TV deal kept the same amount of events, so there's still too many fight nights in my opinion, and it hurts pay-per-view cards. We'll see if that gets any better, but at least even if it doesn't, and the cards are still weaker overall, at least you're not paying more for weaker cards, which was the case these last few years of the ESPN deal, where the cards got weaker and the prices got higher, and that's not great for anyone. That was not a winning formula in terms of making your current fans happy or gaining new ones. So overall, I think this is a big deal. You might think Paramount paid a lot, but it's a competitive landscape out there, and the fact that they have the rights in the U.S. for every UFC fight, they didn't have to split it with anyone, any of that, and the fact that UFC fans do travel platform to platform, that's proven. And you got new owners who want to make a splash, and sports is a currency of television now. I don't know if you've paid attention to that, but a lot of the money and a lot of the driving factors to live TV is sports. It's one of the only things left. You still have to actually watch live. Dana made that same comment multiple times during his round of interviews, which is, it's just true. It's like, yeah, it can be a great show, but you can watch it whenever you want. You can watch it 2 years after it comes out. Sports, you still need to watch it live, or at least for normal people. I feel like I definitely am one of those people. I won't watch a replay if I missed it. It seems pretty pointless for the most part. So yeah, there's big currency in that. Like anything, anytime there's a new owner, they like announcing themselves, so that's a big splash for them as well. It was also the only sports property left, essentially, after F1. At least in principle, it seems like it's going with Apple. So the splash left to make was with the UFC, and I think it's a smarter play anyways. I think ultimately this will work out for Paramount. I'm curious to see what they do with their new ownership. They didn't seem to imply they showed him like more of their longer term plans and also other stuff outside of the UFC, and he seemed excited about it. And I know there'll be tech forward, and it'll be just interesting, just kind of what they'll bring to the table with Paramount. And obviously, streaming battles continue. Peacock's gone all in on sports, so I guess now it might be CBS and Paramount's turn. They already have sports, mainly soccer, but now getting in the combat sports, especially if they had the boxing, they might be one of your best streamers for combat sports, and we'll see how that works out for him. But overall, I think as a fan, you should be excited about this, and I think it's a good deal for all the parties involved. So anyways, guys, that was my 16-minute ramble about this topic. Let me know what you think about the deal, if you think, the UFC won it or Paramount won it, if it's good for both, if it's bad for one or the other, bad for both, if you think it's bad for fans, if you wish they would have gone elsewhere, just let me know. But overall, I think just the fact alone that pay-per-views are over makes this a big win for the fans, regardless of where they ended up. And luckily for me, I'm one of the people that already has Paramount Plus, so it's not even an extra cost. It's just a great deal all around. So once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you later.